They're calling it the Azzurri apocalypse in Italy. We're calling it the death of a dynasty. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of WION Sports. My name is Yash. For only the second time in the history of the competition, a Football World Cup will have no Italy as participants after the four-time world champions failed to qualify for the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia. Over the next half an hour, we will look to dissect the collapse of a footballing empire and will be joined by two people who, like the rest of the world, have known the Italian football team as stone-setting heavyweights of the game. Carlo Garganese is a senior editor at goal.com. He joins us from London. Novy Kapadia is India's leading football voice. He is with us here in our studio. Carlo, I welcome you to WION as you join us for the first time. You made some scathing observations about the plight of Italian football in the aftermath of that result. We will come to that and the details of the disaster in just a bit. But your first comments on what you saw in Milan on a night that meant so much for an entire country.
Well, it's just it's an absolute disaster for Italian football. I wasn't shocked, to be honest with you. I saw it coming. I mean, I wrote a feature a couple of days before in which I said, regardless of the results in Milan in the second leg, that there needed to be a big revolution in Italian football. Italian football has huge problems at the moment from top to bottom, and maybe Italy needed a disaster like this to wake them up. I hope that there will now be huge changes.
Novy Kapadia, you are our go-to man for all things history in football. But the last time Italy didn't make it to a World Cup almost even precedes you. It's what we could call here in India the equivalent of an Indian cricket team failing to qualify for the Cricket World Cup.
Yes, but you know, the writing was on the wall. I mean, after 2006, you know, the Italian team's performance in the World Cup has steadily gone down. There was that brief renaissance, the Euro 2012, where they reached the final. And somehow, the creativity, I think Italy has been rescued in these last decade by Andrea Pirlo. With Pirlo going, that ability to play that perfect through ball, to find space, they just don't have a midfielder like him. And just like colleague from London said, that the difference is that Italian football is in shambles. There are no great players emerging, especially up front and in midfield, and the defense is also aging.
Carlo, as we proceed with the show, let's go back through this qualifying campaign, not just the playoff. There has been no dearth of questions over the tactics of coach Gianpiero Ventura, not just in the two legs of the playoff, but all through the qualifying rounds. It was in a way evidenced at San Siro when you saw the sight of Daniele De Rossi almost helplessly signalling towards Lorenzo Insigne, almost as if to tell the coach, put him on. Well, yeah, one of many things that Ventura got wrong. His tactics have been awful throughout the campaign, and so his team selection. And I think Insigne is the common denominator in both of those things. Ventura's preferred formation is the 4-2-4 formation, which in modern football just doesn't work. It hasn't really been used since probably the 1958 World Cup, when Brazil used it, and that's the last time, funnily enough, that Italy didn't qualify for the World Cup. To use it against Spain, who have the best midfielders in the world and dominate the centre of the park, was just absolute suicide. So that was a very, big sign that the Ventura was completely out of his depth. And he's failed to use the best players. I mean, the most informed players in Italy right now are Lorenzo Insigne, Jorginho, and Steven El Shaarawy. And he didn't use any of them in the first leg against Sweden. And that's happened throughout the campaign. He hasn't used the best players, Italy's most talented players, and this is the result. Novy, when you look back at the qualifying campaign, and Carlo brought up that loss against Spain, equally embarrassing were really off-par displays against the likes of Macedonia and Israel, where Italy were far from satisfactory. Aging as it were, the problem is this was still a similar setup to the one which humbled Spain at the European Championships just a year ago under Antonio Conte.
Yes, I think Antonio Conte was a very inspirational manager. He managed to get the best out of the players. Ventura seemed to be, you have managers like this who are obsessed with their plan. I mean, definitely, I fully agree with Carlo. Lorenzo Insigne is probably the finest informed player in Italy at present. It seemed really surprising why he wasn't tried in the second leg at all, and even in the first leg came on as a last-minute substitute in the last quarter. So it's just that the tactics weren't right, the creativity wasn't there, and when the group was there, I did expect Spain to top the group because I think Spain overall have a better team. But one thought Italy would come through second, which they did. One can say little bit the rub of the green didn't go their way. In the qualifiers, they probably had the toughest opponent. If they had drawn maybe Ireland or Greece, I think you would have had Italian eyes smiling. You would have had Italy in Russia 2018.
Yes, but as it turns out, you do not have Italy at a World Cup for the first time in nearly 6 decades. Carlo, let's delve further into this. Your piece on goal.com enlists a whole array of just what's gone wrong with Italian football. And I'd just like to bring our viewers up to speed with some of your thoughts. You say, and I'm quoting here, if the Azzurri and Italian football is going to return to the top, then the whole footballing system needs to be uprooted, and that starts with kicking out dinosaurs like Carlo Tavecchio and Gianpiero Ventura. Would you like to delve further?
Well, I think the problem with Italian football right now is at the very top in the Italian Football Federation, the FIGC. It's the people that are running the sport. They're all, over 60, over 70 actually. I mean, Carlo Tavecchio's in his mid-70s. Gianpiero Ventura, the manager, is 70 in January, I believe. And so these are people that they haven't moved with the times, and it's just like society really in Italy. There's politics involved everywhere. And really, it's and as I tweeted earlier, it's almost like a cartel. It's just people there that are just looking out for themselves. Even now, as we speak, Ventura still hasn't resigned, which I find absolutely astonishing. If he had any respect for the Italian people and the Italian football fans, he would have resigned immediately after the game. But instead, he ran away from the cameras and let Buffon, but the real man that Buffon is, he was the one that addressed the media straight after the game. And, we saw him cry, which was just horrible to see. Ventura ran away. He barely apologised in the press conference after. He didn't resign, clearly because he probably wants some kind of payoff. I mean, it's embarrassing. There's talk that he's going to get around about 700,000 euros payoff for completely failing Italy. I mean, it's disgraceful, and that really sums up the people that are running Italian football. They're there to think, they're only thinking about themselves, what power they can keep for themselves, cling on to power. Ventura should have resigned yesterday. Tavecchio should have resigned already by now, and that's my concern about whether or not there will be a revolution in Italian football, because the people that are running the game, they don't care about Italy national team. They just care about themselves. What power they can have. And that's my big concern, whether things will change for Italy going forward.
Your thoughts, Novy Kapadia? You've seen Italy, the highs, the lofty heights of the Azzurri. Your thoughts on what Carlo has to say?
Yes, you compare the forward line, which I was there in France in 1998, when you had, people like Del Piero, Christian Vieri, Roberto Baggio, Inzaghi, people like Francesco Totti couldn't make that team, Zola, Totti couldn't make that team. And you compare with the forward line now, there are just not enough creative players coming out. Yes, I agree with Carlos that, probably this, they also need a sports code about aging sports officials. So after having an inspirational manager like Antonio Conte to go back to, a 70-year-old who Carlos has called like a provincial manager, like Ventura, probably wasn't right. Ventura just seemed very rigid in his tactics. If he had been a little more creative, used the flanks much more, El Shwari and Insigne had stretched the Swedish defence. You know, the irony is that this is not a great Sweden team. I saw Sweden in '94 when they came third in the World Cup. That was a really good Swedish team. This is a team which just defends well and had, you know, kept their discipline, kept their shape in midfield and defence. I mean, this Sweden team is not really going to, you know, sort of set Russia on fire next year.
Carlo, you speak about the rut of the system. Is that also causing a problem, not just in terms of administrative decisions, but is there also somewhere a lack of quality players coming through the system? You mentioned in your piece about the absolute dearth of Italian players in the top 5 Italian teams. Is that part of the problem? Is that where this whole episode begins?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to know. It's a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it, really? Where does it begin? But, I mean, we can see the symptoms, and that is, yes, you're absolutely right. There isn't the players now, and there isn't the players coming through, which is the biggest concern right now. The forwards that Italy have at the moment are the worst that I can ever remember, definitely in my lifetime, but going back to, you know, even before the 50s, I've never seen such a terrible batch of forwards as there are right now. I mean, Ciro Immobile is quite highly rated in Italy. I don't rate him at all. If he was, you know, he's playing for Lazio. Manolo Gabbiadini is a Southampton striker who doesn't even play every week for Southampton. Adera is a reserve for Inter. You know, these are mediocre players, and they're in the Italy national team.
If I may interrupt you, sorry, Carlo. If I may play the devil's advocate here, Ciro Immobile, you talk about his ordinary performances for the national team. If you go just by club performances at this point this season, he has scored or assisted a greater number of goals than any player in the top 5 European leagues.
Well, yes, he has, but you've also got to look at the quality of the opposition that he's playing against. And, you know, I'm the biggest Serie A fan there is out there. But the Serie A right now is not of a high quality. The top, you know, 4 or 5 teams are good, but after that, there's nothing. I mean, the bottom half of the division is a dreadful quality. So you're always going to get a lot of goals against those teams. And yes, I know Immobile did score 2 goals against Juventus. And I think he scored against Milan as well. But, you know, you've got to look at who he's playing for as well. And there's also a big difference between playing for a team, with all due respect, a team like Lazio, and then playing for a big team that's, you know, that you have the pressure of playing in Champions League and even playing in a better championship. And Immobile, whenever he has played for a bigger team, when he was at Dortmund, even when he was at Sevilla, and also when Italy really needed him, like in this playoffs, he's always flopped. And he's 28 in the new year, so he's in his peak now, and he'll be 30 by the time of the next tournament. I mean, yeah, I've had a lot of arguments about Immobile with others. I don't think he's good enough for Italy, and I think the fact that some people in Italy pin their hopes in him tells you everything about the state of Italian football right now. Because, you know, like our colleague just said there, back in 1998. He would have been the 15th choice forward for Italy.
Right.
And that's not exaggerating.
Point absolutely accepted, Carlo. Now, in times of despair, you've got to look ahead to the future. The first problem, of course, that needs to be cured is a new coach. Assuming Mr. Ventura is either sacked or decides to resign himself in the near future. There are some names out there in the market, Novy Kapadia. I can think of Carlo Ancelotti, who's on the lookout for a job. You never know how long Antonio Conte is staying at Chelsea either.
Yes, I think Antonio Conte is probably the favourite. I mean, he doesn't seem to be having a very happy time at Chelsea. And I think he understands Italy very well. But, you know, just giving another perspective to what Carlo said, I followed the Under-17 World Cup very carefully. Italy were knocked out by Turkey. Turkey was the weakest of the European teams in that Under-17 World Cup. You know, so there's obviously a problem. There's a paucity of talent. They'll have to, you know, they used to always mock the English earlier. I mean, they'll have to go back and do what England are doing, give a lot of emphasis on youth development. You know, somewhere at the core, the cream of the talent is really not emerging. And they have very major problems. Just changing a manager is not going to help. Ancelotti could be stopgap for some time. I mean, he's very experienced. He's a very good tournament manager. But I think in the long run, either we have Conte going back or the young Napoli manager, who's also very highly rated.
Carlo, a word to you on the managerial front, whoever is part of this race. I mean, you do point out that Italian managers were responsible for delivering 3 out of the 5 big European league titles just last season. Is it time to bring some of them back home?
Well, you see, that's the thing. I mean, going back to Euro 2016, I would say that actually Italy's squad in that tournament was actually weaker than their current squad. The reason they did so well in that tournament was purely because Antonio Conte is an absolute world-class manager. You know, probably the top 3, at least the top 5 managers in world football. And he just got the absolute best out of them. And, you know, they could have won that tournament. One thing that Italy don't have a shortage of is top managers. There's so many great managers that Italy have. I mean, they produce more managers than any other nation. So the managers are there. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you haven't got the players, there's only so much that you can do. I would like to see Sarri manage Italy, purely because I think he plays a very modern brand of football, pressing high up the pitch, passing football. I think one thing that Italy does have coming through is they have a lot of good central midfield players that can play with the ball. Jorginho, Marco Verratti, Pellegrini, the young Roma player, I think has a good future ahead of him. That is the one area of the pitch where Italy are, you know, do look quite good. So I would like Sarri. I think he could do some good things in the midfield.
Right.
But I'm not sure he will go for the job. I think he probably deserves a big European club team before he thinks about the Italy national team. And I think right now that probably Ancelotti might get the job.
Right, almost out of time on this discussion, Carlo. Sport, we realized in Milan the other night, wasn't entirely fair to some stalwarts of the Italian game, but we want to be fair to some absolute heroes, some legends who bow out: Buffon, De Rossi, Barzagli, Chiellini. One word from you, Carlo, on heroic careers which sadly met an unfortunate end as far as their international stints were concerned.
Buffon, it was so sad. I mean, he's the greatest goalkeeper of all time. He's a class act on the pitch and off the pitch. There isn't one person in football that doesn't hate him, that doesn't love him, I should say. Yeah, it's sad because he would have gone to a record 6 World Cup and probably broken the all-time record for international caps. So that's very sad that he's been robbed of that. And again, De Rossi and Barzagli, fantastic players. Chiellini, I'm not sure if he's confirmed his retirement yet, but if he goes as well, again, 4 fantastic players.
Novy, quick final word. Gianluigi Buffon, perhaps the greatest.
Buffon in tears in the interview after the World Cup was very sad, and as Carlo says, that world record of 6 World Cups is going. And that whole, you know, that era has come to an end. The Chiellini, Barzagli, that great defence, which was saving Italy all this time, even that has come to an end. End of a dynasty.
Yes, end of a dynasty. All good things must come to an end, isn't it? On that note, gentlemen, Carlo, Novy, thank you so much for your time. Dark times for Italian football, Carlo, but we'll hope that the mighty Azzurri can rise again from this present abyss.